Good morning, I'm WaywornWyrm, and welcome to my channel, and welcome to the second episode of Space is Wide and Good Friends Are Too Few. Commodore Silva read over the documents in his hands a second time before finally looking up at the smartly dressed woman in front of him. She was a representative of the Tyndall Aerospace Industries. Okay, I'll bite. What does it mean? She took a deep breath before starting in on a speech she had clearly practiced. And why not? As the head of the Space Navy, he was one of the few people who you absolutely had to impress if you wanted to be in the Trans-Newtonian business. As you are no doubt aware, Lyndsay Skull published a paper a few months ago in which she laid out how to create a theoretical nuclear thermal engine that used thorium as the catalyst for the nuclear reactor. The report you hold in your hands is the proposal by my company for a practical engine that uses the proposed engine designs that Dr. Skoma wrote about. He nodded. Sure, and how far along in development are you? She blinked a second at this. The answers were there in the paper she had given him. We have a working prototype. We have all the instructions to turn to the manufacturing over to the government factories. And they should be able to finish one very quickly. Thank you, this should be good. I'll have someone in my logistics department call your company soon in order to work out licensing and other fees as we adopt this engine. A week or two later, Commodore Silva found himself in an engineer's office as they finished up the specs for a proposed new ship, the Victory class. So, tell me about this new class. Well, it would have about a quarter of the size of the Shuttle B, almost the same size as the first model of shuttle. It would have 25 crew, and would have the same sensors that are on the Shuttle B, but this time designed for it, so it would save some space and it would fit better. It would have a range of 10 billion miles versus the 7.6 billion of the Shuttle B and the 9.9 of the Shuttle. But the biggest difference is in speed. The Shuttle could go about 105 kilometers a second, while the Shuttle B is a bit slower at 80 kilometers a second. And the biggest reason for that difference is the Shuttle B is larger, but without any extra engine space. This new proposed vessel, with the new engine from Tyndall Aerospace Industries, would be capable of 1,315 kilometers per second, the engineer said, going over the various data points they had figured out. Commodore Silva's jaw hit the floor, almost literally, when he heard the speed. Are you sure? Are you sure you're not off by an order of magnitude or something? That's a huge increase in speed. That was unthinkable. In one engine generation, they were proposing a 13-fold increase in speed. That was beyond crazy. The engineer, a thin man who was well put together with the almost obligatory glasses, just shrugged. Yeah, we're quite sure. Going by what TAI said they created, and based on Dr. Skoma's work, these engines, that sounds correct. Welcome to the world of Trans-Newtonian physics. We don't know what's next or what's reasonable anymore. To be honest, the Samsung and Wary engines that ran on the Shuttle and the Shuttle B are just normal old-fashioned engines that were essentially jury-rigged to be able to process thorium and use it as a fuel. Dr. Skoma's paper indicates that this is about the worst possible way to use thorium. So it could be that this jump is so big because we're now using thorium just more efficiently, and that there will never be another engine design break this significant, or even It might be that every generation might see such a drastic increase over the last generation. We don't know. Dr. Lyndsay Skull was beat. She had been burning the candle at both ends for far too long. Although luckily, for the last 6 months, she had been working on things in her field of research. No more of this engine nonsense, at least for now. She had solved a good chunk of the problems with a weapons-grade laser system. There was still, of course, work left to do, but using a lot of what she had learned from working on engines and power supplies that they'd been having her work on for the last several years, she was able to solve most of the issue with lasers. She was able to create capacitors that were large enough to hold a useful charge for a weaponized laser, and she'd figured out how to make them small enough that the entire system was similar in size to a normal naval gun emplacement. Unfortunately, the capacitors didn't recharge as fast as she would like, but she was confident that they could recharge fast enough for the lasers she thought were within her grasp. With how the focal lenses were set up, it would be best to start with infrared frequencies. The longer the wavelength, the better the lenses would work to focus and project the beam coherently. But before she could finish working on those, the fickle Earth Federation had taken away her spot at the top of the roost and given the labs back to Dr. Zapata, the founder of TNP, with her project for cryogenic transport pods. Apparently, she had come up with a way to cryogenically freeze people for a short amount of time so they could be transported with minimal fuss. It sounded so weak. Came up with a way to possibly come up with a way. I mean, come on. The reason why this was being entertained was twofold, of course. The first reason was she was Dr. Zapata, and she created the largest breakthrough in human history, and the Earth Federation would give her almost anything she asked for because of that fact. And the second reason was apparently the main application she was creating the project for was colony ships. And her dreams of humans settling the various parts of the solar system matched with the goals of the Earth Federation. There was plenty of mining to do, and if they could get people to do it, that was great. It would be cheaper to set up mining operations that were human-run rather than fully automated mines in probably even most cases. And it would be another first for the Earth Federation to start colonies on other planets. But it was all bullshit. She had created engines that had propelled humans faster than they had imagined. Dr. Zapata's work on Sorium might have brought down the trip to Proxima Centauri down to 12,000 years. But her work, Lyndsay Skull's work, had brought that 12,000 years down to just under 968 years, an order of magnitude, and then a quarter more off just for kicks. All of this to say, it was bullshit that her funding was cut now. She needed to work more on the lenses. She'd gotten the focal size good and created the entire concept, but she didn't have working lasers at the moment. She needed to figure out how to best shoot electromagnetic energy through the lenses and prove her so far mostly theoretical work before they could have a working laser. The thought that kept pushing against her mind every time she thought this, the thought she was pushing out just as hard as it was pushing in, was that there was no need for weapons for the Earth Federation Space Navy. Humans had yet to find life on another planet, and there were no plans on changing that anytime soon. Humans were united as a single group for the first time in history, and anyone who might want to challenge the government didn't have the technology to even begin to think about how to create ships to challenge the EFSN. And if there was some sort of rebellion or insurrection or something, a good old-fashioned army still existed. Commander ZacharyFerraro was the perfect choice for the commander of a ship. He was decisive as could be, he seemingly lived for the Navy and nothing else, and he was a problem solver in the best way. He was also very good at his job. He was the second best survey sensor reader that the EFSN had ever produced, even better than Lieutenant Commander DeFries. A lot better than Lieutenant Commander DeFries, if Commodore Silva was being honest. He was also good at training his crew, and showed an aptitude in both espionage and logistics at or better than the level he was at surveying, and he had some decent ideas on theoretical terraforming. Because of all of these reasons, Commodore Sid Silva had no trouble in picking the captain for the first Victory-class geological survey vessel. While Lieutenant Commander DeFries and the Enterprise were working their way through the gas giants and their moons, the Victory would first go to the asteroid belt and start scanning the asteroids there for any Trans-Newtonian minerals. They were trying to get as full of a picture of the entire solar system as they could before setting targets for colonization. Dr. Zapata's work, when and if it came to fruition, would create an easy way to start colonizing the solar system, and with that, they'd be able to start large-scale mining in the best places. And all of that beside, the Victory class was the first class that used the new TAI engines, and Sid was quite eager to discover if the engineers were right about how fast the ship could go. Commodore Sid Silva found himself in the offices of President Darrell Rafter, the head of the Earth Federation, and the leader of the almost 650 million humans that existed in the universe. He was sitting in a very nice chair on one side of a very large, very expensive-looking desk, while the president sat in the chair on the other side. It occurred to Sid that everything in this room was designed to convey power and influence and wealth, from the rich carpet to the several bookcases made of thick and sturdy hardwood, filled to the brim, but neatly, to the desk, to the flags flanking the president, to the large windows overlooking a snow-covered landscape behind him, to the semi-formal meeting space behind Sid, where most of the daily briefings took place. Sid was so busy thinking about every facet of the room that he almost missed when President Rafter began talking. "Sid, you have been in your position for almost a decade now, and we know each other quite well, so I hope you will forgive me for being as blunt as I'm going to be in this meeting. I have reports that Dr. Zapata finished her work on cryogenic transport a few months ago, and that recently you accepted a new engine design, this time by..." He trailed off for a second as he checked his notes on a nearby tablet. "Blurton and Seaver. I also have reports that the Enterprise has surveyed out to Jupiter and its moons before we realize that that is the edge of its effective range, while the Victory is busy working on the various asteroids in the belt before hopefully being reassigned for the outer planets." I know you have a comprehensive database listing all of the Trans-Newtonian minerals, their amounts, and the relative difficulty to mine, at least that we've found. I've seen the database. But here's what's troubling me. You're not projecting that we start colonization for at least another 5 years. Why is that? Sid knew this talk would eventually come, and he thought he was prepared for it. Apparently, he wasn't as prepared as he thought he was. That is all true, sir. The engine design we just accepted is a very large, efficient engine that primarily favors a low fuel use over direct power. The good thing about this is it doesn't need our orbital maintenance facilities to remain in working order. For freighters and colony ships, which we are planning on using this engine for, it's perfect, and we imagine these ships to be large. And that's one of our major problems right now. The Buck-Walter Witherspoon shipyard just can't handle it. They have 2 slips, and each slip has a capacity of 1,500 tons. And our estimates, as my ship designers are creating new ship classes for freighters and colony ships, puts any freighter or colony ship we could make at much, much larger than 1,500 tons. Much larger than we can reasonably ever expect the Buck-Walter Witherspoon facility could ever hope to handle, even if we were able to retool it for the new class. It's not feasible until we get new shipyards up and running. And preferably soon. Thank you all so much for listening to the second episode of Space is Wide and Good Friends Are Too Few. Make sure to tune in on March 10th for the next episode of this series. And also, make sure to tune in tomorrow for the next episode of WaywornWyrm Plays.